Welcome to the YourTown television program. This segment is brought to you by the MPS Foundation. My name is Jeff Kline, and I'm your host for this segment. In this particular segment, we have our guest is Captain Doug Otte, United States Navy retired, and a senior lecturer in the Operations Research Department. He represents both our faculty member from our non-tenured track, but also he's a distance learning instructor, and we're going to find out what that is today. Welcome to the show, Doug.
Well, thanks for having me, Jeff.
You bet. It's unusual that you're in Monterey because you actually live in Washington, and we're going to get that aspect of distance learning and how that's accomplished at MPS. But first, let's learn a little bit more about you and your career.
All right.
You had a full career in the Navy before you joined MPS. Why did you join the Navy?
That's a great question, Jeff. I actually came up, born and raised in the bedrock of future naval operation or
naval operations
officers. Goodness gracious. A small farming community in northwest Iowa.
Sure, and that's where all the Navy officers come from.
Absolutely. less than 1,000 people. But for some reason, I was always interested in the United States Navy. I was introduced to the United States Naval Academy by my career counselor at the school. And I said, what the heck, I'll apply, and was accepted. And that kicked off a 30-year career.
Fantastic. So. Now, you went naval aviation.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that experience. Why did you decide to fly in the Navy?
Well, that's a great question, too. Because I had no background in aviation at all. My last company officer at the academy was a S3 pilot, and so he kind of piqued my interest, and I started looking into aviation. And obviously I knew at that time I didn't have 20/20 vision, so I wasn't going to be a pilot, but found that there were opportunities to fly as a naval flight officer, and decided that was the career path I wanted to go.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about what a naval flight officer is, what they do, and the type of aircraft you're in. But let me ask this question first. Just because you don't have 20/20 when you enter the academy doesn't mean you can't fly today now. Do you get corrective surgery?
Yes.
That's the case,
we're both old guys.
Yeah, that's right.
But in today's Navy, you can get corrective surgery to bring your eyes to 20/20. And
right.
if that corrective surgery is successful, then you can be a pilot in today's Navy.
So what's a naval flight officer do? And what aircraft did you fly?
Well, I flew the EA-6B Prowler, again, because we're old guys, aircraft that's no longer in the inventory. But my job as a naval flight officer in the EA-6B, we were electronic countermeasures officers. We ran the electronic countermeasure system that was in the airplane.
So explain a little bit about electronic countermeasures.
We would understand the radar systems that the enemy were using to track aircraft and so forth, and then we would actively jam those with pods that we had on the aircraft.
So you were confusing their radar picture with active transmissions.
Absolutely.
Was this both shore-based and ground-based radars, or aircraft as well?
Most of the time we went after shore-based, ground-based. We did have a capability, do have a capability against air-to-air also.
Now, something that most people don't know is that electronic aircraft mission was once both an Air Force and Navy mission. And then during your career, there was a decision that was made that only the Navy would start buying these tactical aircraft capable of doing this, which means that you had to assume much of the ground-based mission as well. So tell us a little bit how that made it different for your career.
Everything you said is absolutely correct. And it was right after Desert Storm that the Air Force scaled back their capability. They had the EF-111, which was a similar capability as the EA-6B. And due to cuts and so forth, they gave up that mission. The Navy took that mission over. We stood up 5 new squadrons, and we called them the expeditionary squadrons. That they would go to expeditionary bases across the world.
For a Navy guy, that means on land.
On land, absolutely. And so it was just a different community path, or a different path within the community. You either had the aircraft carrier squadrons, or you had the expeditionary squadrons that deployed out of land base.
Well, now, were they fungible? Did you sometimes deploy on carriers, and then maybe your next tour belonged to a squadron that deployed on land?
Yes, and I say that hesitantly simply because once you got into the expeditionary, initially you were fungible. You went
right.
one way or the other. Afterwards, once you got into the expeditionary area, there's an aspect of the carrier squadrons, the CQ, the actual landing on the aircraft carrier,
right.
That takes a lot of training.
Oh, I see. So you start removing that training.
And so we started removing that training from the expeditionary squadrons. And so once you got into that, especially as a pilot, once you got into that role, you were almost dedicated to the expeditionary.
Now, you had a full career in this, including squadron command, is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
And where did you do your squadron command?
I did an operational carrier squadron, the Yellow Jackets VAQ-138.
All right.
And we were deployed off of the Stennis, the USS Stennis.
Now, tell us a little bit about what deployments were like on an aircraft carrier. Where are some of the places you went?
Oh, I've been all over the world. As a young JO in my first squadron, we went to the Mediterranean and did Mediterranean deployments. My command tour, we were West Pacific, and actually supported Operation Enduring Freedom. So.
Now, I warned you I was going to ask this question before the show.
Yep.
Tell us about some of the most enjoyable times you had on those deployments.
Well, and thank you for the heads up on this one. I've had an opportunity to think about it, and I will go back to one of my first deployments. It was actually my second deployment, where my wife had the opportunity to come over to Europe, and France specifically. And so we were able to spend 8 days in France. I took leave, and so we traveled all over France, up to Paris, across the Riviera. And it wasn't our honeymoon, but if anybody asks, what our honeymoon was, that was it. Because of other circumstances, we really didn't have a honeymoon right after our wedding.
Well, those are some great opportunities. I know in the naval service, we have to be gone a lot from our families, but periodically, when they can join us or our spouse can join us for a while to actually see some of those and share some of those foreign experiences, it's always a real treat.
Absolutely, and if I may add another, I had the opportunity after my command tour to go over to Japan. And you've had the opportunity to be in Japan, but I took my family, my 3 youngest children, with us, and they were able to see the Far East, Beijing, Hong Kong, down to Australia, all across Japan. And that was a wonderful opportunity for them. Unfortunately, with the op tempo that we had with the carrier,
you didn't see
I
much.
didn't see nearly as much.
I had the same experience. It's the culture experience that you're able to provide your family, though.
Yeah,
that was an amazing thing. Well, now you came to MPS too. You were a Naval Postgraduate School student at one time.
I was.
And what did you study?
Operations research.
Okay, that's great. And in addition to your operational tours, going to sea and flying, you also then practiced that. So what did you do in the Navy with your operations research degree?
Yeah. Great question, Jeff, and thanks for asking that. I like to tell all my students that I have now that I really had parallel paths or career paths within the Navy. I had that operational path that we've already talked about, flying EA-6Bs all the way through command, and then having the opportunity to go to Japan and was a staff on the Kitty Hawk. But I also had this analytic career path. And so that started off with my education at the postgraduate school a long, long time ago. And then every one of my short tours after that, I essentially did what we refer to as utilization tour, mostly in the Pentagon. After my second tour in the sponsor of the Operations Research Department, OPNAV N81 organization, I was asked to come out to the postgraduate school to be a faculty member, and where we met and spent last 5 years of my Navy career as a faculty there.
Well, tell us a little bit what you did when you were in the Pentagon. What does an analyst do in the Pentagon? What was your job? What were some of your responsibilities?
There's a wide breadth. We do actual analytic work. Most of the time, an analyst will just be a study sponsor, i.e., I'll be the action officer for the admiral that follows some analytic body of work that's being done by a contractor on our behalf.
Sure. So give us an example of one of those studies.
Well, one of the studies was the rising cost of aviation aircraft.
Okay.
RAND did that study for us in N81. They had previously done a study as far as the rising costs associated with our surface combatants. And so we did the transition and wanted to know why the cost of aircraft and the support equipment and everything that goes along with aircraft appeared to be rising faster than the normal inflation. And so they took a look at it. They looked at all the cost implications associated with the aircraft, and were able to give us some insights with regards to that issue. And so with the aviation background, I was obviously somebody that understood aviation talk, and I could make that translation, if you will, for that civilian contractor.
And vice versa. So one of the things you just said was you made the translation between the analysts on the operational side, but at the same side, once the study was done, as an analyst, you were able to interpret that back to Navy leadership to see what kind of impact might be required.
Absolutely, yes.
Now, were you involved in force structure planning at all?
I was. I had the opportunity when I first joined the OpNav staff, my second time as a 06.
As a captain.
As a captain,
right.
Thank you. That I was the force structure analyst was my title for the Navy staff when Admiral Mullen became the Chief of Naval Operations, and he asked for a review of the surface Navy, or the surface combatants within the Navy, to understand what that force structure should look like in the future. And so we did it ended up being about a 6-month study, taking a look at all warfighting capabilities across the Navy, and came up with a force structure that Admiral Mullen adopted and kept during his entire tour as Chief of Naval Operations.
Now, the reason I ask you to do that is your experience is not uncommon to many of our graduates. After they go through MPS, they receive the graduate education that is afforded to them by the nation, actually, and its citizens. They then turn around and help plan both the strategy, the platforms, the force structure, the plans that take us forward toward whatever strategy that the President and the Congress decides to go ahead and empower us.
Right.
So your career experience was not unusual at all for someone with an MPS graduate degree, and your impact has been it's still making an impact. But you talked about the end of your career being here as a active duty military officer in one of our senior chairs at the Naval Postgraduate School, but then you transitioned and we were able to luckily capture your skills as a senior lecturer and continue to teach for us, but you abandoned us. You went to Washington State. So tell me, why did you return there?
Well, as we talked about, I was in the EA-6B community, and they are single site located at Naval Air Station Whidbey Island, up in Whidbey Island, Washington. And so if you ask any of my children, and my wife and I have four children, 3 boys and a girl, if you ask any of them where home is, they will tell you that it's
there.
It's there.
Yeah.
And so Mama, Grandma now, wanted to return, home so that we had a place for the family. And so when I was negotiating, if you will, the opportunity to continue to teach for the postgraduate school, one of the conditions was, well, I'm moving to Washington because Mom is moving to Washington, and I want to be where Mama is. And so they made the opportunity for me to, as you said, teach in the distributed learning curricula that we have at the postgraduate school.
So our distributed learning is extensive. We have almost 900 students just in the graduate program themselves. By the way, we also have short programs that we also offer in that area. So tell me some of the courses you teach via video teleconference and computers and that sort of thing.
There's 3 primary courses that I teach. 2 of them are capstone project courses. One for a cost estimation, master's degree in cost estimation and analysis, and one for systems analysis. And those capstone courses are the students basically take the tools and techniques that they've learned over the previous education within the curricula and apply it in a real-world analytic problem that has been brought forth by one of the sponsors of the program or a sponsor of the analysis.
Can you give a recent example of one of the Masters of Systems Analysis projects?
Actually, we just heard from a former student on one that was done for an aviation community, and that aviation community, and I don't want to get into a lot of the details, but basically we're looking at an aging airframe, and we're looking at potential ways that they could extend the life of that aircraft. And their approach was this specific aircraft they had to use operational airplanes to do their training. And so they were using service life on the operational aircraft just to do training.
So they didn't have planes specifically for training.
For training.
So they had to take something off the operational line to get the training done.
Absolutely.
Right. So that uses up the life of an aircraft real fast.
Very quickly. Yeah. And so they came up with the idea, and they analyzed it and provided a very strong analytic underpinning where the community could go out and lease aircraft to do the pilot training. And that way you don't utilize these operational aircraft that can be better used, obviously, for real-world contingencies. And that analysis has been presented all the way up naval aviation hierarchy, and the decision has been made to do exactly their recommendation, is to buy trainers, lease aircraft, to do the training rather than using operational aircraft.
So let me reinforce this, because this is common within many of the naval postgraduate schools distributed and distance learning programs. The students who are out in their command tours or in their organizations, they take time off to listen 3 hours a week potentially to a video teleconference. They do work extra asynchronously on the computer. The projects that they work on are real-world projects embedded in their organization, and this particular example you just provided is not really unique, but it is outstanding because it was very recent. That the project that you did to graduate was actually addressing that real-world problem on aircraft, and was later accepted as a decision in the operational side. That must be very fulfilling for you.
It actually is, but I'm going to push it back to the students. Here we have operational students that saw an issue associated with their particular community, and they wanted to take a look at that as part of this graduate education program that they were in, and they were able to solve the problem. So young lieutenants were able to come up with a solution that leadership said, yeah, that's a great idea. And so it was very satisfying.
And your continuous contributions at MPS are greatly appreciated just in that way. So Doug, thank you very much for being on a guest on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me, Jeff.
Yeah. And thank you for joining us for this segment of the YourTown television program. We hope you've enjoyed this insight into what our faculty and students are doing, and we hope to see you next time for another segment sponsored by the Naval Postgraduate School Foundation. Thank you.